Welcome to the Rob Seco Field Ready Podcast with your host, Jim Robinson.
Hello, and welcome back to the Rob Seco Field Ready Podcast. I'm your host, Jim Robinson. Soybean yields are coming in, and several times a week I get a call or a text message about how high soybean yields are this fall. It's hard to imagine that just 3 months ago we were in kickoff meetings dominated by discussions about how bad the soybeans look across the countryside from Dicamba damage. Today, to talk to us about a little bit about that, we have Regional Sales Manager Kip Rowe. Welcome back, Kip.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. Glad to be on.
So, Kip, what are you hearing and seeing about soybean yields this fall?
Well, soybean harvest is progressing along pretty quickly. With the weather we had there through most of our footprint, things dried down extremely quickly. A lot of areas haven't had a frost yet to help, so few green stems out there. But I think statistically, nationally, we're sitting at about 50% harvested across, and with some areas being ahead and some being behind. But overall, progress is progressing quite nicely.
Yeah. So what are the yield trends, overall? We're hearing a lot of above normal, but this year is probably different than most others with, some areas receiving a fair amount of drought throughout the year, although we did get rains in August. What are the overall yields coming in that you're seeing?
If I was to surmise soybean yields this year, I would say surprising. With as dry as it was through the summer in many parts of our area, we just felt we were going to be looking for an average to below average crop. And as we've got out there and harvested, there are certainly some areas that were affected all throughout and don't have as good as soybeans. But overall, I would say the soybean yields are very impressive.
Absolutely.
Many fields in the 60s, 70s, whole farm averages in the 80s, even in parts of Iowa and Minnesota that we've seen.
Yeah, we've gotten a lot of really excited calls from some customers who have been seeing some really big numbers on their yield monitors and what they're actually delivering to the elevators. I mean, overall, we're hearing that soybean yields are actually beating estimates, and nationally, corn yields are coming in comparably, but soybeans are much better than what they're expected to be overall this year. So, Kip, back in late June and all of July, we literally fielded hundreds of questions and concerns about Dicamba damage in soybeans across the countryside. What had so many of these growers concerned?
Well, I think with the Dicamba applications we had a ruling from EPA that opened things up a little bit on application and windows and when they could spray. Now, there was supposed to be a little bit more record keeping, but other than that, the label had kind of been broadened. When we were seeing these drought conditions as guys were spraying Dicamba, and there was a lot of volatility taking place, some drifting taking place, with soybeans, non-Dicamba tolerant soybeans being so sensitive to Dicamba mixed with heat and drought, we saw a lot of cupping and a lot of visual symptoms from Dicamba moving around in the air. Yeah,
so I mean, that Dicamba moving around in the air, it really doesn't take much to actually get visual symptoms in soybeans. I mean, a direct application of Dicamba of less than 5% of the labeled rates can devastate yield in soybeans, but actually even 1,024th dilution of the labeled rate of Dicamba can cause identifiable symptoms such as cupping, as you mentioned. And so between volatility and tank contamination, there were a lot of cupped soybeans out this year.
There were, and we were already heading into what looked like drier than normal, and there was some uncertainty. You mix in some Dicamba injury, and it led to a lot of fear of yield loss. We weren't shading the row as well. It looked like plants were maybe dying a little bit earlier than normal, and so I think it led to a lot of uncertainty and guys questioning maybe where they're going to go in the future.
Absolutely. And, it's a constant reminder when you drive by your field day in and day out and you see the cut beans that are stunted and may or may not recover based on what they knew at the time. And so, it is a really emotional, frustrating thing. But Kip, what are we seeing on yields of these fields that have been impacted by Dicamba?
Well, Jim, it looks like the dicamba didn't affect anything as far as yield goes. It's been much better than we predicted. In many cases, these fields are reaching, historic averages that they haven't reached before. We've done a lot of data on, our own trials, our own plots, and even third-party plots where, right now we're showing almost a bushel advantage over XtendFlex for dicamba tolerant beans with the Enlist beans that were cupped or injured. So, if it did do any damage other than visual, it certainly doesn't appear to be showing it. The Enlist platform is performing marvelously. In fact, Jim, if you were to go to look at third-party independent data using the first trials, for example, and look at the platform comparisons. Take a look, pull them up, look at Enlist E3 beans versus XtendFlex. The farmer or the customer or the dealer or even us can see for ourselves that, the Enlist are performing extremely well, and they have about a bushel advantage when we run all the data across the points. So, the data is out there for people to look at. Enlist are performing really, really well, even in spite of some dicamba damage.
Absolutely. That's been really exciting to see, and it's caused a lot of relief among these customers. Would you say that these results are surprising?
Based on the initial reaction, the visual nature, I would say yes, it's been a little bit surprising. Even as a trained agronomist myself, I had some trepidation when we're going through these dry areas. Is it going to hurt? Is it not? So pleasant surprise. I've even taken some pictures of some of these plants that are, shorter from node to node, and made a comment the other day. The IS 1761 E3s, they look kind of like a bunch of bananas hanging there. There's not the height is about half of what it should be, and it's just all pods. Mm-hmm. Been very surprising and very fun to see too.
Oh, for sure. You really sit down to think about it, and for these fields that we're able to get some late moisture and maybe shade the row better than we thought they might have, because beans will continue to grow and put out new trifoliates even after exposure. They were able to, while having shorter internodes, actually continue to put on the same number of pods that they would have otherwise, maybe even have reduced their potential for getting white mold, which could help yield overall. And, we did a fair amount, or at least saw a fair amount of plant samples being tested and going in, and many of them did come back at or below 3 parts per million. We didn't really see any impacts on yield in those fields, but in at least one field, anecdotally, where we measured 6 parts per million, there were some significant yield reductions, but that definitely does not seem to be the norm.
No, and I would say that's more of a direct drift out application than it is volatilization when we get levels of that nature.
Oh, for sure. For sure. It's pretty tough to get 6 parts per million from an actual volatility exposure. So, yeah. Kip, taking all of this into account, we've had, a lot of cup beans across the countryside, but it doesn't appear to have impacted yields. It can be really frustrating when you drive by it every day. What recommendations do you have for farmers who are considering which platform or platforms to use in 2022?
I think it really comes down to evaluating your agronomic needs first. Do you have IDC? And we need to look at what soybean, regardless of platform, is going to fit your acre the best for IDC, sudden death, or even maybe it's a pay-king that you need for assist resistance. So I would say first evaluate what your agronomic needs are on your farm, and then evaluate which varieties provide the best package overall. When you're looking at putting things together, not just looking at one variety, but looking at the whole package. And what does the yield potential look like? Just on our work comparing Enlist E3 platform versus XtendFlex, the yield potential for Enlist is higher across the platform than it is for XtendFlex. So that should lead into making a better decision there. And then finally, what does your weed control program look like for your farm? Are you want to use a strong pre with a great residual, and then have the option for glyphosate, glufosinate, or a much lower volatility product and Enlist choline 2,4-D. So kind of putting the whole package together, Jim, on when you evaluate the platforms.
Absolutely. So just because you saw a lot of cupping in your fields this year doesn't mean that should be your primary driver for selecting a soybean variety or a platform for 2022.
Absolutely not. Think about what's best for your farm from an agronomic standpoint and what brings you the best return on investment first.
Perfect. So Kip, just to kind of summarize everything we talked about, we had literally hundreds of concerns coming in June, July, and even into August a little bit for dicamba damage in non-dicamba tolerant soybeans this year. But what we saw, or what we are seeing, is that the vast majority of these fields are actually out yielding historical yield trends for that same field and for those geographies, meaning that the dicamba damage didn't necessarily limit yields overall. I mean, it doesn't take much dicamba to cause cupping in soybeans, but it takes a bit more, especially direct application or direct drift, to actually reduce yields. And so, our anecdotal evidence is that anything under 6 parts per million appears to have no effect, whereas anything above, resulting from that direct application, is likely to have some issues. And so, taking all of that into account, make sure that as you're making decisions for 2022 and beyond, that you're not just looking at, are the beans going to be ugly this year because they could be cupped from another year of high dicamba usage, but rather look at what your agronomic needs are, whether it's cyst resistance, sudden death syndrome, IDC, what's that overall agronomic package look like? And then, ultimately it's yield that gets you paid. And so, look at yield and make sure you take into account what your herbicide program looks like. Anything you want to add to that?
I guess the only thing I would add is don't let fear make your decision.
That's a great addition. Well, thank you, Kip, so much for joining us today.
All right. Thanks for having me on, Jim.
As always, be sure to tune in on the 1st and 15th for every month for new episodes. And until then, stay field ready.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Rob Seco Field Ready Podcast. Join us next time to be field ready.
A Hurrdat Media Production.